Leadership Series is a speakers forum for current and former high-level military and defense leaders from both the United States and the Middle East to discuss the most important policy issues facing the two sides. The series was inaugurated on June 10th with a conversation with Centcom Commander General Frank McKenzie. And of course, we wish our friend General McKenzie the best of luck in his transition, and we thank him for his service. And Major General Eric Kurilla, we look forward to working with you as you assume your responsibilities as CENTCOM Commander. Admiral, I'll introduce you briefly, and then we can get into the discussion, which I remind everyone is on the record and broadcast live on YouTube and on our website, www.mei.edu. Vice Admiral Brad Cooper is a career service warfare officer. He served on guided missile cruisers, guided missile destroyers, aircraft carriers, and amphibious assault ships. His ship commands include USS Russell and USS Gettysburg. Ashore, he served in a variety of executive military assistant and special assistant roles in the White House, in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, AFRICOM, that's US Africa Command, and US Pacific Fleet Headquarters. Vice Admiral Cooper has received various awards throughout his impressive career, including the Distinguished Service Medal and Bronze Star Medal. Now, of course, I'm only mentioning a snapshot of Admiral Cooper's bio in the interest of brevity, but his full bio is posted on our website and that of NAVCENT. Admiral, welcome to the Defense Leadership Series. You know, this is always an important conversation, but it's especially important now given we have to acknowledge it, the tense relations between the United States and at least some of our Gulf Arab partners. It is a low point, if not the lowest point in the relationship. But for folks like you, Admiral, you got to keep going. You know, you got to silence the noise, and you got to take care of the tactical and operational elements of this cooperation. In any case, you know, we very much thank you for taking the time to do this, Admiral. I know you have a pretty nutty schedule, so I personally appreciate it, and I'm sure my colleagues at MEI also appreciate it. As we were talking before going online, you mentioned to me that currently you're actually not in Manama, you're in Tel Aviv. Tell us why you are in Tel Aviv, and any opening remarks on your part, sir.
Great. Well, first, Bilal, thank you very much for the kind invitation to join. I very much appreciate it. It really is a great privilege, and I'm looking forward to today's chat with you and the audience. Yeah, I'm here in Tel Aviv to celebrate the kickoff of a bilateral capstone exercise between the Israeli Navy and the U.S. Navy that we commenced yesterday out of Eilat, where the Israeli Chief of Navy and I kicked off the exercise. For those who are not aware, just over 6 months ago, Israel was realigned from orientation U.S. European Command to the U.S. Central Command in this NAVCENT. And this is our first large exercise called a capstone exercise. So we're here to celebrate that. We've done a lot of smaller exercises in the last 6 months. So we're here to do that, as well as meet with Navy leadership and joint leadership, as well as our great embassy team here. And great to join for this. And of course, this is a trip. I'm able to travel around the region quite a bit, been able to work through COVID quite well. I just think in the last month I've been to UAE and Qatar last week, and Saudi Arabia twice, and Egypt. So this is a continuation of those trips, celebrating and kicking off this big exercise.
Perfect. Ever since the inclusion, let's just stay on topic. Ever since the inclusion of Israel into CENTCOM, I mean, obviously this creates more work for you, but it's the good kind of work. So, I mean, just very briefly, tell us why this is really a strategic opportunity for you.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do it briefly, but you know, I kind of characterize there's three significant aspects to the relationship that really present incredible opportunities. One is the signing of the Abraham Accords, now 18 plus months ago. There's this shift, as I just described, in orientation and realignment of Israel to the U.S. Central Command, and in my case, as a component to NAVCENT. And then I think it's fair to say there's an orientation among nations in the region of where the threat lies, and the most significant threat would be Iran and its proxies. We can certainly talk about that. So you bring those three pieces together, as well as an armed forces, and more specifically for me, a Navy in Israel, who is very capable. And I think that creates enormous opportunities.
Fair enough. Okay. Let's take a step back, Admiral, and mention the speech that Secretary Austin had. It was a keynote that was part of the Manama dialogue. And he mentioned integrated deterrence, right, as a sort of a new strategy moving forward in terms of how to deal with many of our Gulf Air partners, but also, frankly, around the world, as a new concept by the Pentagon to establish real partnership, as opposed to us, doing the heavy lifting and sort of how we did things back in the day, right? When you hear the speech, when you hear integrated deterrence from the secretary, right? So very top of the chain of command. What does that mean to you as commander of the Fifth Fleet, at least? Is it just amplifying what you already are doing? Or do you feel the need to formulate new initiatives to make this concept work at sea?
Yeah, I think that's a terrific question. And I can remember the secretary discussing this back in November. And of course, he rolled this out well before that.
Right.
To borrow an Army and Marine Corps term, I have a very clear sight picture of what this means for me here at the fleet level. There are two aspects that intersect directly with what we do every day. And there are two of our principal lines of effort. The first one is to strengthen partnerships in new ways, and also to accelerate innovation. And we're doing both of those. I'm happy to talk about this as part of the discussion. But let me just describe a little bit of the partnerships and the innovation aspect of this. So we are, of course, decades into strategic relationships and presence here in the region. We've had partnerships for decades. They're strong partnerships, and the region is vast. As a refresher for the viewers, this particular region, and the region that I have maritime oversight, stretches from the Suez Canal down the Red Sea, around the Gulf of Aden, into the Indian Ocean, up into the North Arabian Sea, Gulf of Oman, and then through the Strait of Hormuz and into the Arabian Gulf up to the north. 3 strategic choke points. It's 8,000 kilometers or 5,000 miles of coastline alone, much less all the water in between. So that is a vast region. There's not one Navy who can patrol that by themselves. So we rely and we have hinged on these terrific partnerships that we've had in the past. I'll describe the most significant ones in the region. One we lead on. One of my hats is the Fifth Fleet Commander. One of my hats is the commander of the Combined Maritime Force, CMF. Right. 34 nations. It's the largest maritime partnership in the world. The most recent member was about a year ago in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And this partnership has 3 operational task forces that focus on maritime interdiction, maritime security, counter-piracy, as well as a more focused effort on security, maritime security, in particular in the Arabian Gulf. That's the biggest one in 34 nations. Right. The second one that's about 30 months old. It was formed after a series of kinetic attacks in and around the Strait of Hormuz in the summer of 2019, called the International Maritime Security Construct. Right. A tactical arm called Task Force Sentinel. We command that as well. If we were talking a week ago, I would have said we have 8 members, but as of this last weekend, we now have 9, with Romania having joined. That mission of this task force is one of both deterrence in the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb, as well as reassurance. In the case of both of these organizations, they're doing great work, and I'm happy to get into it a little bit. And then the second piece is the innovation side. Innovate. So we are about 6 months into standing up a new task force called Task Force 59. It's the Navy's first and only operational task force that is focused on unmanned and artificial intelligence. It literally, its title is Task Force 59. The commander is Commander, Unmanned and Artificial Intelligence Task Force. This task force is charged with accelerating innovation and accelerating technology and applying that unmanned and artificial technology. And what I'll tell you is it has exceeded our every expectation. Today, we have unmanned surface vessels, which are cutting edge technology out enforcing maritime security in the region. And we've gone from nothing to something very quickly. Importantly, back to the first point, in the last 6 months, we've established 2 hubs with partners, one out of Bahrain, logically, and then one out of Aqaba, Jordan, with our Jordanians. This has offered tremendous opportunities. We've had unmanned activities out of both. And then and just last month, we finished an exercise called IMX 22, International Maritime Exercise 22. This gives you a sense of how important partnerships are. We had 60 nations participating. It's the largest exercise that we will do in the Middle East this year. As a component of the exercise, we had 10 nations and over 80 unmanned systems, which constitutes the largest unmanned exercise in the world.
Right.
So you can get a sense of the two, where the partnerships come into play and where the technology comes into play that didn't exist before. And this, of course, is where our real opportunities lie, is out to the horizon.
Fair enough. And just to make sure the audience understands that CMF happens on a voluntary basis. There's nothing mandatory about it, right?
That's exactly right. These are countries who, over a period of years, CMF itself is about 20 years old, a little older, and countries volunteer their people or their equipment or both in these operational task forces. In our headquarters, we've got about 200 international officers and enlisted on the staff, representing about 29 of the countries today, and they rotate in and out, based on the mission. But it goes far beyond just the Middle East. So, for instance, of the 3 task force commanders today they happen to be Pakistan, Jordan, and Kuwait. If I were gone back 6 months, they will have included Brazil and New Zealand. So you really get a sense of how broad this effort is. As I look forward, I would anticipate we'll get more nations joining.
Yep. So we've had CMF for some time now. And you said the latest member is Egypt, right? Big country, obviously has huge stakes in maritime security, given the responsibilities of security in the Suez Canal. I guess I could ask this in different ways, but let me ask this in the most positive way. Now that they're a member of CMF, tell me a little bit about the process. Did they call us up and say, hey, we want to take part of this, or did we incentivize them, or could you say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-way handshake with them. And what I'll tell you, let's just talk about Egypt for just a second, since we're on topic.
Please.
So in my 30 years in the Navy, I have never seen a brand new Navy base until this job, and I've seen 2 of them. They're both in Egypt. They also have several ships and a brand new surface Navy with large amphibious assault ships, very high-end and capable combatants. We've done a large number of exercises just in the last year. We essentially tripled our exercise regimen, working both as partners, but more importantly, I think, as friends. And of course, I think it would be obvious to most, the important nature of the strategic relationship between the 2 countries, particularly given the Suez Canal. And particularly if you walk back to last year, the impact of what one ship that had a mishap in the Suez Canal had on global commerce.
Right.
So, as we look ahead, I think it's important that we maintain what we've got. And in fact, our goal is to strengthen that relationship with Egypt, and we're doing so, which is really true. It's a privilege to work with them at sea. And
is a good bit of it American equipment?
It is equipment from a large number of countries that, if you looked in the wake, reflects relationships over a period of time, but certainly has we are represented in there, quite notably. And it's always good when you visit their Navy bases. You look over and look at the ships, and you say, "Hey, look at that! There's a frigate." In fact, we just had an exercise the other day involving a frigate known as Oliver Hazard Perry class.
Yep.
It's doing great. So it's a real privilege to work with them.
Because why I'm asking, because when I get to the issue of interoperability, right? So, which is always important. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. We're going to get back to a lot of the things that you mentioned, Admiral, as far as the new initiative, as far as the unmanned aerial systems initiative that you talked about. But let's go back to threats. I think you mentioned that right in the beginning, right? So just, a basic overview of what kind of threats you have to deal with day in and day out at sea. Of course, starting from piracy, which is no longer what it used to be. It's actually a little bit more sophisticated now with, pirates using weapons, GPS guided rockets, or night vision goggles, or so on and so forth. It's not the same pirates that we had to deal with before. And then, of course, all the way to conventional aggression or intimidation by Iran. So just give us a picture of what kind of threats you have to deal with.
Yeah, if I could just zoom out on this. It's well understood that Iran is the most serious threat from a regional perspective. China is obviously the pacing threat from a global perspective.
Yep.
And from Iran, that threat manifests in different ways. There's the nuclear component. There's the ballistic missile component of it, including the massive growth in capabilities and numbers. There's a cruise missile component, massive growth in capability and numbers. And there's an unmanned aerial vehicle, a UAV component, including mass proliferation of those and increased capabilities, mass proliferation of all three of those. There's the proxy dimension of that. And then really on kind of a different level, there's the piracy component and smuggling. So I think to me, what the logical question is, hey, how are we getting after that? What are we doing about it? So on the nuclear side of this is obviously being undertaken down the diplomatic lane. I think we all pretty familiar with where we are and the intention there. If we take a look at what are we doing about ballistic missiles, what are we doing about the cruise missiles and UAVs, we believe that the best way to get after this is to strengthen the partnerships that we have in new ways. One very commonly agreed upon by all countries way to do that is to integrate air defenses here in the region. I think that's the greatest opportunity. I think another way to go after it in a meaningful way is to enhance maritime security.
Right.
I'm happy to talk about both of those. And then, at a different level, as I mentioned, there's the proxies who take these weapons. They manifested in attacks just this last week. We've seen that in Saudi Arabia. And then at a completely different level, there's the piracy issue, which I'm pleased to tell you, the team here has done terrific work and deterrent work. Knock on wood, we haven't had a piracy incident in quite some time. It's fragile, but there's a significant group who gets at this every day and is doing terrific work. So I'm super pleased with that. And then there's the smuggling, both in terms of weapons and drugs.
Yep.
We're very focused on both. On the drug piece, we have had a large number of interdictions this year. We've interdicted, this is quite extraordinary, $660 million worth of drugs in terms of their street value, which is a gigantic number. Every penny of that was going to go to something nefarious. It's not now. And then on the weapons side, over about the last year, we've interdicted about 9,000 weapons, a large number of missile component parts, and all kinds of smaller pieces, every one of which was going to go to the battlefield in Yemen, and it's no longer going there.
Where's it coming from, Brad? I mean, I suspect I know where it's coming from, but just
as was well established is recently as the last couple of weeks. It's in a DOJ report. It's coming out of Iran, and it's largely flown to Yemen.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's so I think it frames how we're getting after the various issues.
Fair enough. And just to be clear, so piracy emanating primarily from the Horn, is that correct? Horn of Africa.
It does primarily overwhelming majority of piracy historically. Again, we haven't had any of late. And when I say of late, like a couple of years. So
Somalia also, right?
That's right.
Okay. I mean, as long as you have collapsed governance and political instability, you're gonna have piracy, right? That's the bottom line of it.
Well, you could, unless you have a proactive plan to establish a deterrent posture, which we do, which allows. And so what of all that goes down to the supporting maritime security and stability that allows the free flow of commerce throughout the region.
Brad, believe it or not, last week in class, I teach a course at Georgetown on the US defense strategy in the Middle East. Last week's subject was maritime security. And the students and I were talking about, what does the NAVCENT commander worry about the most as far as contingencies, right? And it typically is, Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. And then we got into a discussion as to how they could do that and whether they actually want to do that. Because at the end of the day, it's like shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, why would you want to close it and deny yourself the opportunity to export your own oil that is critical to your economy? But, there are all sorts of reasons where that could happen. And it's always been an issue out there that's debated. And the Iranians have actually multiple times threatened to do such a thing, right? I mean, if you are facing an existential threat, they might resort to something like this sort of as a last resort, right? But I don't want to preempt your answer, but in terms of now that you've described those threats, and as you think about contingencies, what is that one contingency that you worry about the most?
Well, what you described is certainly a concern, but I think the one that's most predominant on my mind on a day-to-day basis is the threat posed by those conventional weapons that I described, the ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and UAVs. And you've seen this just in the last couple of months in the region, attacks in Abu Dhabi, attacks in Jeddah, just this last weekend. And so it's well established, as we mentioned. These originate in Iran, they flow to Yemen. And so this goes back to what are we doing about it? Thus, our very heavy emphasis, and for sure we've done this for many, many years. We have a more resource-intensive approach this time to getting after the smuggling of these weapons and drugs. And as described, we've been pretty successful lately. And the key thing is to be able to keep at it. And I'm confident that we are importantly, we're making a difference on the battlefield. So I think that's helpful. But overall, I think when you get right down to the things that we're doing, it really is about, to counter this threat, is about strengthening the partnerships and then taking innovation and accelerating it faster. We can't be talking about what we're going to do in years. It has to be what we're talking about in terms of weeks and months. And that's where this unmanned task force has come into play. So what this has brought us is the ability to put more eyes on the water in a vast sea. And thus, when you have more eyes, you can see, not only can you see what's going on, but there's a deterrent effect. It's the security guard effect at the mall. If you walk into a mall and you see a security guard, and there are cameras there, you are less apt to commit a crime for fear of being caught. That same thing is applicable on the sea. And that's why these new USVs are important, because they simply allow us to see more today than we have been able to see in the past. Thus, us working with it, but more important than that, working with our partners through the region. It's really critical.
Fair enough. You mentioned the international maritime security construct, right? IMSC. Just tell me a little bit more about that. What is the status of that right now is, and what do you expect down the road? What are you most excited about?
Well, IMSC, and they're about 30 months old, now 9 members, as Romania just joined here this last weekend. They're oriented toward both deterrence in the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb, as well as a reassurance mission. The team is doing terrific work. I think it's a dynamic region, and things can change quickly. But they're doing rock solid work every single day, ensuring the free flow of commerce throughout those 2 strategic choke points. If I were to look into the future, I would anticipate there will be more nations joining. We're in discussion with several. Of course, we let those nations speak for themselves as time goes forward. But this is the type of thing that I think we want and need to do. Take these very effective partnerships that are delivering with impact and effect, and strengthen them and expand them.
And the Brits are part of it, right?
They are. In fact, they're deeply a part of it. In fact, the tactical commander is a British Commodore who leads the tactical actions on a day-to-day basis. The British have been doing this for several years quite effectively. Not only is this a military operation in kind of a pure sense, but we also work very closely with various maritime trade organizations around the world, most notably the UK's Maritime Trade Organization, UK MTO, which has extraordinary awareness. And we also clutch in, if you will, to the various operation centers of nations in this particular region. So terrific relationship. It's going in an excellent direction, and we just simply need to keep at it.
What will it take to get the French in?
I would ask the French. But having said that, we work with the French on a day-to-day basis in one way, shape, or form. If I just think about last year, we had a French aircraft carrier strike group here. They performed the role of they took what is historically a U.S. role in commanding surface ships in the region called Task Force 50. They're enormously capable. They're great friends, and we work with them every day in one way, shape, or form.
They're still running their own separate maritime security initiative, right?
There is another maritime security initiative called EMSO in the region, which was established at about the same time.
Right.
And but we certainly are coordinating with them.
I mean, if I remember correctly, when we launched Operation Sentinel, I think the French had some concerns about the type of mission that Sentinel had regarding countering the Iranian threat, or at least deterring the Iranian threat. And so that's why they, given the policy differences, I guess, they ran their own initiative as far as maritime security. But the hope is that, we can combine these two and get what you call, a more comprehensive maritime security domain awareness, right? But, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We're still partners, we're still allies in NATO, but you'd love to see at some point these two efforts being integrated, right?
Well, we're always at our best when we are teaming with partners. We're really at our best when we're teaming with high-end and very capable partners. And as I mentioned, we're working with the French frequently. I think just 2 weeks ago, they had a very large drug interdiction as they were working under the authorities of the Combined Maritime Force. So we're very close interaction. We have a French captain who's a liaison officer in the staff. I routinely communicate with my French counterpart. Great relationship, terrific friends, very capable guy. So I'm pretty happy where we are. And as we look to the future, always looking to do more from a relationship and integration standpoint, for sure.
Copy. You mentioned that in passing, Brad, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into it because I thought it's a pretty important and pretty cool initiative, to be honest with you. So just in February of this year, you announced the launch of this new joint fleet of unmanned drones with a bunch of allied nations to patrol the vast swath of the region's volatile waters. In addition to what you told me already, just tell me why, again, are you excited about this initiative? And are we still in the aspirational phase? And when is it actually going to see the light of day?
Yeah, we're past aspiration. We're in execution.
We're good.
Okay. Although of the infancy of execution. So just to frame this for the audience, again, I mentioned the vast nature of the maritime environment here, and the so what, the why do we need unmanned, is because it allows us to put more eyes out on the water that we simply have not had in the past.
Right.
So these platforms, if you think about unmanned platforms, we're all familiar with the fact that we've had unmanned aerial platforms that have been, whether they're predators or the hobby style, you name it, they've been around for a better part of 20 years. And the ones under the water have been around for a number of years. But on the surface, USVs, unmanned surface vessels, that technology, the maturation of the technology is relatively new. It's only in the last year or so, 2 years, where it's gotten mature enough to be able to go out and serve effectively. So we've focused on that in particular, although we're looking at all domains from seabeds to space for sure. And what we have seen through this exercise, in particular last month, but through over about 7,000 hours of operating these systems, who, by the way, can stay, one particular version of this drone can stay out and has stayed out at sea for 45 straight days. No fuel, no maintenance, somewhat jokingly for those of you in the Navy, no complaints from the crew. And that's just not possible with a manned ship without significant support and tail. These just don't require that. So what we've seen is when you put two of these drones together, they use artificial intelligence to map the waters around them, establish patterns of life, and then they use this artificial intelligence to detect when something's unusual, smuggling, illegal fishing, you name it, some other malign activity, and then they send information back to a command center, and then a human being makes a decision what to do about that. That process using artificial intelligence has allowed us to expand our maritime domain awareness 2 or 3 times. So if a country could normally see 20 miles off their coast, you can take a couple of these, and that's 40 or 60 miles. Multiply that by our partners in the region. You can begin to see 2 or 3 times with one country times 8 or 9 countries. You've multiplied, this is just raw math. Your maritime domain awareness 30 or 40 times is a dramatic increase in scale. So that's what it can do for us, and it is unmanned and artificial intelligence. These go together. Our goal is to have 100 of these USVs in what I would just characterize as the world's newest fleet, patrolling around the waters of the Middle East by the summer of 2023. It is a heavily partnered effort. It would be mostly an investment by partners. Some of our partners already have these today in small numbers, but we're working with, frankly, I think we're working with everybody at this point. Everyone's eager to pursue this capability. And so summer of 2023, I look forward to having a conversation where we are. But I can tell you this, we're going to find ourselves in a pretty good spot because it speaks, the advantages, the capabilities that it brings speak for itself.
So a couple of questions on this, Brad. One, how come we haven't done this before? I mean, drones and unmanned aerial assets are nothing new, right? Is it our own bureaucracy in the Pentagon, or what is it?
Well, the technology wasn't necessarily mature enough to fully pursue it. And you put an unmanned surface vessel out there, you have to account for anti-collision. You've got to be able to control it. In this case, in one of the drones we have called a sail drone. It's controlled from San Francisco, with an input from Operations Center. It's pretty amazing technology. So you have to build in all the safeties and the assurances that you're not gonna cause an incident. And at this point, we've worked out the technology kinks. We're past that. We've exercised in very complex scenarios. In fact, in the last month's exercise, in that IMX exercise, we exercised quite vibrantly in 14 different operational scenarios so that we could establish, hey, where are we really going to be able to use these? Where we won't be able to. I describe where we will, and we're really going to seize on that. It's a really strong momentum. But big picture, the technology is mature now to a point that there can be application, so we're not missing the moment in that regard.
So this is primarily, as you said yourself, for having more eyes out there, more ISR. But do we have any intention of arming these assets?
Someday, not today, and we simply need to mature the technology a little bit. We have practiced that. There are some experimentation pieces that are out there. I think that's something in the future. Okay. But really, the real focus today is to expand maritime domain awareness.
Fair enough.
So a better understanding of what's happening out on the water.
Okay. And those allies and partners that we're working with, I mean, they're obviously bringing their own national assets. Could you just describe very briefly the types of capabilities that they have? I mean, I'm guessing there's maybe a little bit uneven as far as what we have and what they bring to the table, but just a few words on that.
Well, unmanned surface vessels, the technology is relatively new, so there are not a lot of countries that have this capability. Right. One of them happens to be Israel, with whom we're working now in this exercise in a multi-domain unmanned exercise as part of the exercise. But we really have the preponderance of the assets because the technology is so new. Our goal is to work with countries, let them see what the technology is, what it does for them, and then work in a partnered way that they could get this in their own hands quickly. And it's which is reasonably easy to do. So that's what we're doing. And
we have the willingness to share that with allies and partners, right?
We do. We have the willingness, and they have the willingness. And it's also reasonably inexpensive. Right. This is I've said in other forums, we'll spend $1 billion on a U.S. guided missile destroyer, which has enormous capability, 30 years of life, a lot of multi-mission. I could buy or lease somewhere around 2,000 sail drones for the same thing. So I'm giving you, we would never stop producing DDGs, nor should we, because we need them. But it gives you just a sense of the scale and the cost and the affordability of the technology.
Are you tracking any FMS cases already from at least Gulf Arab partners to try to acquire some of these capabilities?
Multiple countries are pursuing
Right.
this capability. So yeah, we're working with all of them. Of course, I would defer to the countries themselves would want to get out in front of that, but a good chunk, more than I have fingers on one hand. So that's good.
Could they go through the DCS route, direct commercial sale?
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
Yeah, just quicker.
All right. This is not going to be a subject in passing. It's a big, big deal, obviously. And the fact that you are in Tel Aviv now is testament to how big a deal it is. So Israel is now part of Centcom, right? So I think the opportunities are clear. I mean, you already are seeing the joint exercises. One happened not too long ago between the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, us, and the Israelis. I expect to see more of that, obviously. I want to ask a different question. What are the limits of these kinds of exercises? What are the limits of these opportunities?
Well, I think we serve in a time where I wouldn't begin to put a limit on it because of the
just realistically
opportunities. Yeah, I wouldn't try to bound it. We have not tried to bound it. Look how quickly relationships are evolving and changing. And for the viewers, if you get a chance to just today look at the news and the foreign ministers meeting here in Israel, hand in hand. Can you have imagined this 6 months ago, 9 months ago, a year ago, 15 months ago? I think not possible. So these relationships are changing quickly. And for me, then, bring this down to sea level. What can we do to enhance the relationships and propel them forward? And for me, the fundamental focus is partnering in new ways, bringing countries together. It first manifested back in November in this exercise that we organized that included Israel, Bahrain, and UAE. And as we look to the future, I would expect more than that. Of course, just since the beginning of the year, you've seen a large number of very senior leaders visiting countries in the region that they simply have never visited before. So these are visits that open doors. And if I just bring it down to Bahrain, where we're stationed, we've seen the Prime Minister, the Chief of Defense, and the Minister of Defense in a matter of just a few months. Security arrangements bilaterally between Israel and Bahrain. So I think when you take these relationships in these very fast moving train that is bringing connective tissue and doing things together, I wouldn't begin to put a boundary on it. We'll continue to work with everybody, and I'm excited about it, as are the countries. We talk about this all the time, and I think there is a tremendous opportunity. And I think the opportunity rests in two fundamental areas. The first is air defense. It goes back to concern number one of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and UAVs, an integrated air defense posture in the region. I think everyone would agree would serve us well. And the second one would be maritime security, ensuring the free flow of commerce throughout the region, and maritime stability would serve us well. How we go about that, each of those is a little bit of a different way, but I think those are both opportunities that we would not have had to pursue just a couple of years ago, or even a year or 18 months ago.
Just like you, Admiral, I am excited about these opportunities, but I just wanted to make clear that I didn't mean that we would deliberately put a ceiling on this kind of cooperation. I meant just realistically speaking. And let me ask this question differently. Okay, now that you have this strategic opportunity fall in your lap, right? And for those of you those are going to serve after you and after you, do you have the necessary resources at NAVCENT to fully leverage it? That's, I guess, what I was trying to get at. And, it's only been, a year and a half or so since the inclusion of Israel into Centcom. And so with that, obviously comes, some kind of a burden when it comes to resources. And resources are finite, right? And so with whatever you have, do you feel like you have enough to fully leverage those opportunities that are presented to you? I guess that was the question that I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I do. The short answer is yes. I have the resources necessary to take advantage of these new relationships. It's a priority and in the case of Israel shipped, their ship is actually 6.5 months ago. So if I look 6.5 months, we've made this their integration a priority. I think we're in a terrific place today. We reinforce that through discussions here, but more broadly with all the countries in the region. I think we're in a good position, both bilaterally with the countries and multilaterally in some cases we've described through the Abraham Accords.
So you're happy with the level of cooperation we got from EUCOM?
I am. It was terrific.
Okay, good.
My teammates on the 6th Navier and 6th Fleet staff are terrific. They've done a terrific job.
Excellent. Okay. I want to get to this North Star, as we call it, right? I mean, as we build up all these joint capabilities, as we conduct more cooperation, as we further integrate wherever it's possible, in your mind, as you think of this ideal outcome, as far as maritime security, what would it be?
Well, the North Star is ensuring maritime security and stability in the region to ensure the free flow of commerce. That's where our orientation is. Of course, the question is, how do you go about that? I'll go back to earlier comments. I think we have to take these long-standing relationships that we've had, think about them in new and different ways, focus them in different ways, take advantage of some strategic shifts in the environment, as we were just discussing, one of which is the Abraham Accords, and then take the technology piece that didn't exist before and dovetail those two together. So the strengthening partnerships and that innovation and that technology accelerate it to a point where it's mutually advantageous to be able to do so. And this is what we're focused on. And the fact that we have these existing partnerships that are so large, in CMF's case, the 34 nations, their resources as well as the countries who are participants in IMSC, they're able to contribute. So there's for sure, this is not the U.S. Alone. This is a heavily focused and partnered region and operation.
As you work with particularly the Gulf Arab partners, right? Could you just honestly give us an overview of what kind of help they need the most? What do they struggle with the most? Because obviously, just like any other kind of cooperation, whether it's between the closest allies or partners, nothing is perfect. And this applies to this kind of set of relationships, right? So historically speaking, there is no legacy of these countries really deeply investing in naval power for whatever reason. Okay. Now, a lot of this is changing, I understand. But what are other challenges that you have to deal with as you deal with these countries? And what do you think they need the most help from coming from the United States?
Sure. We just discussed this just 2 weeks ago in Riyadh at a GCC defense working group, one of the focus areas of which was maritime security. And I think everyone would agree that interoperability is the key thing that we have to get after. It's a challenge in every coalition and partnership. It's a challenge with us. But I will say also, we have a shifting of the sands, if you will, if I could use that term, in the region, with countries getting some really significant capability. If I think of the Navy, the Emirati Navy, really sophisticated ships that they're fielding these days, quite impressive. As I mentioned, I was just in Qatar a week ago in Doha, very sophisticated ships that they have purchased, dock landing ships, some other high-end missile boats. And so the key for us is to integrate them. I could use Saudi Arabia, who is purchased 4 US LCSs, but I would call them LCSs that are souped up, MMSCs, here a little bit more weaponry. So these countries are investing in their navies for sure. The capabilities that they're investing in are high end, and the key for us is to bring that together and make them more interoperable. And that's the case with it. But that's the case with every U.S. bilateral relationship or multilateral. The key is focusing on the interoperability.
Can I push you a little bit more on that? And obviously, that's a very accurate observation. You definitely need interoperability when it comes to the systems that we're using. But just tell me a little bit more about employment, right? So we're doing these exercises so that they can be trained on the most effective TCPs, concepts of operations, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot to learn there because the experience in maritime security for these countries, at least some of them, is not very old, right? So what challenges are you facing there, just in terms of employment of these assets that you mentioned? So now that you got the equipment, now that you got those capabilities that are improving vastly, then you get to issues of employment, right? Effective usage of these capabilities. Are you seeing any challenges there?
There's always challenges. I think that when with those come opportunities. So if I think on a day-to-day basis, one of the three CMF task forces, CTF 152, is a GCC task force. That's right. The countries of the GCC contribute to it. They're on patrol each and every day, working together. So we're clearly able to. There are challenges of those nations working together. We're able to work through them, and we work together to ensure maritime security and stability. If I took it to a higher end of tactical warfighting, I'm just thinking about back just a matter of weeks and months ago, where we had US JTACs, Joint Terminal Air Controllers, the folks who call in air support on Emirati ships, calling in close air support on the water. Yep. Pretty high-end, sophisticated way of doing business. And then Emirati Apaches coming out.
Tell me more about that. This is what I want to hear. Tell me more about that.
This is cross-domain. This is cross-domain efforts. In this case, with the Emiratis shooting at the targets out in the maritime as part of an exercise. So these are the things that we've done. These are the things we need to continue to do and increase the level of sophistication. Because as I mentioned, nations are investing in high-end capabilities. We need to create, and we are, scenarios that allow them to use those capabilities in a meaningful way.
Tell me more about that, because you just mentioned the Emirati example. Who else is on top of their game? Who else is really doing things that are exciting, that are really showing the value of this partnership? What are the Kuwaitis doing? I know that the Kuwaitis have commanded task force, I can't remember which one it is, a couple of times now, or several times. What other partners, what are the other partners doing also that are sort of similar to what the Emiratis are doing, and that you really are looking at as examples of, look, this is the fruit of this partnership that we've had for so many decades? Sure.
Well, I see the Bahrainis leading the way in teaming with us in this unmanned initiative. They're first at the table. They are. In fact, we had the Crown Prince kick off our exercise, and with his commitment of where he wants to go with unmanned. A week ago, we transferred the 5th of 5 Cyclone-class patrol boats to Bahrain to allow them to expand their own Navy capabilities and patrol their own waters, but under CMF. Fantastic. So they'll paint the ships a little lighter gray than we have, but retain that capability. And their intention is to put a little bit more of a punch on those vessels. That's terrific. We see Saudi Arabia each and every day with their on both coasts, on both their east coast and their west coast, operating. We just recently had a very large exercise with them off of Jeddah that was sophisticated. So I could talk about all of the countries and what they're doing. They are certainly upping their game in the maritime. It's an important priority. I've talked about Egypt, Jordan's use as a hub, and increased interaction that we've had with Pakistan, frankly. So I think the team across the board is doing a terrific job. Of course, I'm at risk of leaving somebody out. Oman comes to bear. Our integration with their operations center, something that we haven't had in the past, haven't had as strongly as we did in the past, and with them at sea has been great. And that big exercise that I talked about, IMX, they were one of the task force commanders. It's a pretty heavy lift for any nation to be a task force commander in a pretty large task force. They perform magnificently. So I think those kind of a little rapid fire around the region. Those are some examples of countries stepping up and focusing in the maritime that's delivering a capability that in many cases they have not had in the past. Rapid fire that you just mentioned, Brad, do you get a chance to go speak to members of Congress and brief them about these things? I mean, how many people in the United States actually know about a lot of these things, at least, especially in the United States government? Well, we welcome visitors, anytime they can. I have not made a whole bunch of trips back to the United States for reasons you might appreciate. We've been fairly busy, but we do certainly have. We just had a staff delegation last week where we talked about this, and we're open to visit from Congress, academia, you name it. I only mention that because in an era
not too long ago in the previous administration, where alliances were questioned, the value of those alliances and partnerships were questioned. It's examples like these that you just mentioned that will prove to you that they are indispensable. You mentioned the LCSs. I'm going to go back to that. The littoral combat ships. It was just last week, I read an article from a couple of years ago describing the tremendous challenges of that entire program. And frankly, I had no clue what was going on in that area, but just having read that, this was supposed to be a capability that was, I'm not going to say it was going to be the solution to all of our problems in those waters, but it was going to be quite helpful because of its flexibility, because of its ability to navigate at some pretty tight, narrow waters, and it had very sophisticated technologies and so on and so forth. And then the article essentially mentioned that because of financial, because of bureaucratic, because of perhaps way too sophisticated technologies that we were supposed to put on that ship, that the program didn't really take off as we expected it to be. So I'm just going to ask you a simple question and then follow up with one that's a little bit more complicated. One, are we actually using any of these in your area of operations? And then B, what's your understanding of what really happened with the program? Like, why did we face so many significant challenges?
Let me go after the first piece first. I'm very familiar with the platform from my last position where I commanded the surface forces in the Atlantic Fleet. So I'm very familiar with it, and I'm not going to try to relitigate years of what got us where we are. But where we are today, I think we're in a pretty decent position. You have these platforms deploying, and they have been deploying for a number of years, down to U.S. Southern Command doing counter-narcotics interdiction quite successfully. And their operational utility, I think, has been valued there. If you look out a separate version of LCS, if you look out to the Western Pacific and 7th Fleet, and more recently in the Bay of Bengal and with India, you see that version of LCS serving and doing a terrific job of maritime security in and around the Philippine archipelago. There's if you Googled 7th Fleet comments about LCS, high kudos to the great job that they're doing. So I think we find ourselves today in a much better position. I also expect that we're going to see LCS deploying to both 6th Fleet and 5th Fleet here this year. So I'm not, we won't talk about the operational specifics, but I'm excited about the potential that they bring. Very familiar with what they can bring, and I think they're going to bring a lot of value. And I look forward to them coming.
Okay, we got 10 minutes, Brad. I'm going to ask 2 more questions if you don't mind. Okay. You're not in Bahrain right now. I know you're in Tel Aviv, but I want to go back to Bahrain. I remain convinced that this is one of those Gulf Arab partners that provides access that is pretty much irreplaceable. It is unconditional. That is just top notch, especially in an era of post Benghazi, right? Where something happens, we really need to act quickly. We don't really need the permission of the host government, especially if our own people's lives are at risk, right? Tell me a little bit more about this access.
Yeah, well, first of all, we have an extraordinarily positive relationship with Bahrain at just about every level I can think of. Pick a level, it's very, very strong. It's always been strong. It's really strong today. That manifested, if you just think, back to last year's evacuation, the access that they provided to help support during a time that we needed it was critical. We couldn't have done the things that we did without them. We couldn't support 4 deployed naval forces, their maintenance, this whole structure that we have of being 4 deployed, we couldn't do without the Bahrainis. So they're critical, terrific partners, and I just simply can't say enough about what they do for us on a day-to-day basis, not just militarily, but if I take it down at the community level, just wonderfully selfless. Everything from helping us on base improvements to their investments with our families, really meaningful work, and it results in not just words, but through meaningful action. So this last year, the U.S. base in Bahrain was named the #1 base in the world for the U.S. Navy. 68 bases around the world, this was #1. That's simply not possible without the not just help, but the day-to-day support of the host government. So I think that gives you a sense of just how deeply invested they are and the importance of, and then for us on the military side, as you mentioned, how important the access is. We could not do it without the access that they provide.
And just for the audience,
do what we're doing today without the access they provide.
Fair enough. Brad, just for the audience who might not know about this, tell us about those American schools that we have also in the country. Like why are those so important in terms of cultural exchange and so on and so forth?
Yeah, it's a very unique school. It's a DOD school. It's the one Department of Defense dependent school in the Middle East, and it's not just U.S. Servicemen and diplomats' children who are going there, but it's also heavily integrated with partner nations. They have their children going there. This is a real gem of the program, and to be able to grow up as a kid and through your formative years and teenage and high school with children from other countries is deep, enriching, and meaningful. The Crown Prince and his family attended this school. Gives you a sense of the school,
right?
And we're fortunate U.S. Kids get to reap the benefit of this terrific education. And to me, I refer to when you think of Bahrain, what are the three big advantages at a personal level for being stationed in Bahrain? One is your children get a great education. Two, there's unbelievable professional meaning and depth to the work. The work we do on a daily basis is important. And three, everyone lives well. We're well supported by the community. I'd be hard pressed to find a single family who wouldn't say that they don't live well. And that's very enriching. And thus, I think, creates the conditions that we have today, which is a very positive environment and operationally thriving and families doing really, really well. We're really happy with it.
Okay. Final question, Admiral, and I didn't mean that the final question is the least important, far from it, but it's sort of like a broader question, sort of outside your set of immediate concerns, I would say. What's the relationship of the Fifth Fleet with the Chinese Navy? I mean, we're at an era, as you mentioned yourself earlier, and it's made clear in the National Defense Strategy, the upcoming one and the previous one, that we're in a state of competition with the Chinese. But you still also have to balance between competition and cooperation, especially in your part of the world, where maritime security is a collective interest, right? So A, what is the relationship with the Chinese Navy? And B, how do you balance between these two competing objectives?
Yeah, let me just frame it in broad terms and kind of take it down to some level of detail. So obviously, broadly, China is the pacing challenge and threat that we have from a global perspective. As I mentioned previously, regionally, the most serious threat is Iran. But I think if I'll borrow your words of, and the well-known perspective of strategic competition. So if I view this as a competition. So when I wake up in the morning, this is a competition. If I look through the lens of the 15 countries in the region that have a maritime boundary, where do we stand as their number one preferred partner? And I am confident to tell you that we are the number one partner of choice in 13 of those 15 countries. For Iran, their partner of choice is China. For Syria, their partner of choice is Russia. Those aren't going to change. But for the other 13, I find ourselves in a really good position. Then on a completely different level, what's the level of investment that we, the United States, have in these partnerships and the relationships vis-a-vis what does that Navy relationship look like for China and Russia? So last year, we had 33 exercises in the region. Russia had 3, China had 1. But we're just the takeaway there is we're just in a completely different position in this region relative to China from a naval perspective. Now, in all fairness, I would acknowledge, as would anybody who's familiar with the economic component of in the region, what they're doing economically. But from a Navy to Navy perspective, we find ourselves in a good position. I described why we're in this good position. But we have to stay on this. We just can't assume that every day we're going to be number one. Thus, we're focused on the same level of engagement, thinking about it a little differently, doing some things a little bit differently, partnering a little differently, as I've described. And I think going forward by doing so, we'll continue to maintain that #1 position vis-a-vis China for those 13 countries.
Any final words, my friend?
Well, wonderful to join today. I really appreciate it. I look forward to staying in touch with just you personally, with MEI, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to offer a little perspective of what's happening out here in the Middle East region. And I hope that the audience is able to find that the work that we're doing is both uplifting, it's meaningful, and at the end of the day, I'm confident that we are contributing positively to maritime security and stability in the region, and that critical aspect of ensuring the free flow of commerce. So thanks so much for joining, and very much appreciate it.
We're the ones who are grateful, Brad. Very much thankful for your time. And as I told you before, my hope is that we'll get a chance to see you sometime in the next couple of months in Manama.
Great. Look forward to it. Thanks.
All right. Have a great day. Take care of yourself.
Out here.
Bye. Bye-bye.